In this new paradigm, we cannot afford the luxury of the old language of East versus West. As for Kenya, we are aligned to neither. We are firmly and irreversibly aligned to progress.
With both China and the United States ratcheting up their investments in Africa, Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta welcomes US President Barack Obama. Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C., and this is The Heat. It was a bit of a homecoming for President Obama, returning to the birthplace of his father, or as he put it, returning as the first Kenyan-American president of the United States. But family ties aside, there are serious political and policy issues to discuss, according to the World Bank. While not without its challenges, Kenya is emerging as one of Africa's key growth centers, poised to become one of the fastest-growing economies in East Africa. Such progress is, in part, due to investments in infrastructure, agriculture, manufacturing and other industries, investments that come largely from the world's two economic superpowers, China and the United States. And while both countries downplay any competition, much is at stake. Later, we'll talk with a Chinese scholar and a former US ambassador to the Congo and Nigeria. But first, we get more on President Obama's visit from CCTV's Jessica Stone. She joins us from our newsroom. And Jessica, beyond the personal, there were some serious political and policy issues, as I mentioned, raised by President Obama on this trip.
Absolutely, Anand. And he was part of a meeting on Monday with regional leaders about ending the civil war in South Sudan, for example. Peace talks there have a deadline of August 17th. And Obama wants to be part of the conversation of what happens next, in part because the U.S. is a major donor to the people of that country. Listen, he's also had a broader discussion in both Kenya and Ethiopia about countering the threat of al-Shabaab, which has ties to al-Qaeda. Monday, he also pledged $465 million in new training funds and an additional $40 million to counter violent extremism in East Africa. Obama is also encouraging leaders to end corruption in their governments, a factor he says in why his own father left Kenya so long ago. And he also talked at length about promoting entrepreneurship and changing the status of gays and women, saying that treating women and girls as second-class citizens are, quote, bad traditions.
Now, earlier this month, Jessica, China pledged to strengthen its industrial cooperation with Africa, this in addition to a rather robust trade partnership. How does China's engagement differ from the United States, and is there room for both?
All good questions, Anand. And if you remember the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit here in Washington last August, this was a question I also posed to many business leaders. Is there room for both types of engagement, I asked. And what you'll hear from African business and government leaders is really yes. Listen, they don't want to turn down any opportunity, and the differences between the American and Chinese strategies actually put the African nations and their leaders in the driver's seat. Clearly, though, it is much easier to physically see what the Chinese investment looks like. There are things like schools, roads, railroads, mining operations. The Chinese have invested a record high $4 billion last year. The U.S., meantime, focusing on things like capacity building, innovation, entrepreneurship. We are seeing a lot of American support for inventions that solve problems with water or food supplies, even health care. One U.S. business leader put it this way when he's talked about this difference. He called infrastructure the first wave of investment in Africa and said innovation is the second wave, one he believes the U.S. is better prepared to lead on. Anand?
Thanks, Jessica. That's CCTV's Jessica Stone reporting.